When I was only 4 years old, my father left the family. He disappeared, as if he had disappeared into the fog, leaving not a single trace, not a single contact, as if the life that we started together was just a fleeting dream. My mother stayed with me and soon married another man. He, my stepfather, never showed malice towards me, did not offend, did not humiliate, but always kept his distance, as if trying to draw an invisible boundary between us. He openly told me that no matter how hard I tried, for him I would remain the daughter of a stranger, an outside part of his family, his life, his universe. He never tried to create the illusion of fatherhood, did not offer intimacy, and with every glance, with every careful word, this boundary became more and more noticeable. My mother seems to have found solace and joy in her new family. She gave birth to 2 more children from her stepfather, created a cozy nest around herself, where, as it always seemed to me, there was no place for me. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that in this house full of people, I was superfluous, unnecessary. I thought about it in silence, but the memories that became painful only strengthened my conviction with each passing year. I began to see in my mother a cold aloofness and deep indifference, as if her love, if it had ever been, had long since faded away. Confirmation of all this came after my first year of college. Mom, without further explanation or regret, asked me not to come home anymore, as if my presence was disturbing her newfound happiness. I blocked her number, and from that moment on, communication was cut off. I cut myself off from this family like a piece of wood that fell into a stormy sea, leaving behind my mother, stepfather, stepbrother, and everyone who once meant so much to me. The stepsister, however, continued to keep in touch. It was only thanks to her tenacity that I had this single thread-like bridge to the past, thin and fragile. But even this did not smooth out the sharpness of the feeling that I was, in fact, simply rejected, cut out of my life. It was so painful to realize, and it took a long time to get over the fact that they decided to live as if I had never existed. Independence became my salvation. I built my life without anyone's help and soon learned to exist in this solitude. I thought I would stay on my own until one day I met the man who became my fiancé. He was 28 years old, and in 4 years our relationship blossomed in such a way that I believe that maybe my happiness still exists. His family, who come from quiet suburbs where life flows smoothly and predictably, welcomed me with incredible warmth. Their home, full of care and cordiality, became something alien and at the same time desirable for me, like an oasis of tranquility that I always looked for, but did not find. Over the years, I've shared my story with him, slowly but surely opening up my scars, telling him about a past that seemed to have been forgotten, but still echoed painfully in my heart. He knew everything that was going on, met my stepsister, and although he never insisted on anything more, he was always there for me. When we started planning the wedding, the question of the guests inevitably came up. We discussed who we would like to see on this day, and I talked about my friends from college, colleagues, those who had become a real support for me. He seemed convinced that, despite everything, I should invite my parents. I didn't immediately understand what he was trying to achieve. Maybe it was important for him to find out if I had some hidden interest. Is it possible that there was a thirst for reconciliation inside me? I confidently replied that I did not intend to invite them, and explained to him that if they ever wanted to bring me back into their lives, then it should be their decision. I am in contact with my sister, and it is quite clear to me that it is easier for them to live as if I am not there. Then, depressed and full of anxiety, I headed to our bedroom, trying to digest the whole conversation, thinking over every word that stuck like a splinter in my memory. Anger was bubbling up, confusing with a sense of resentment, filling my head with thoughts about how my life, which seemed to me to have finally found harmony, was on the verge of breaking again. I sat in the semi-darkness, trying to drown out this hum of emotions, trying to put my thoughts in order, but when she came in, it seemed that the tension only increased. She looked at me with incomprehension and a strange aloofness in her eyes, as if her perception of my experiences had lost its former sincerity. She tried to talk, to start a dialogue, but I couldn't stand being in the same space anymore, where everything that was dear to me suddenly turned into a cause of pain. After a little hesitation, I took my keys and went out, trying to escape from the heavy thoughts that persistently tormented me. I went to my friends, hoping to find in their company that simple understanding and support that seemed to have disappeared into thin air in recent days. Talking, laughing, and a warm atmosphere made my condition a little easier, but even in this environment, the shadows of the past and worries about the future did not leave me. Returning late in the evening, around 11, I lay down on the sofa, wearily closing my eyes, feeling the physical and moral heaviness of all the events taking place. The next morning I found out that she had left for work without saying a word to me. I stared into the empty kitchen, thinking about her silence, about her look that flashed before she left the house, and suddenly I felt that I didn't know where we were standing now. Her behavior caused me misunderstanding and pain. It seemed that this deep abyss of misunderstanding, which had come from somewhere between us, had already captured most of the space where mutual respect and love used to be. I began to doubt whether my anger was excessive, whether I had overstepped the mark in my words and actions, whether I had shown rigidity where flexibility was needed. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think that her persistent unwillingness to understand my feelings and history was an alarming signal that I couldn't close my eyes to. Internally struggling with this mixed feeling of guilt and resentment, I thought that a conversation was needed, that we should openly lay out everything that worries us both, tell about all our fears and experiences, leave them on the surface, like cards on the table, and finally come to some understanding. I wanted her to understand that my parents would not be a part of our lives, no matter what she said or what others suggested. When my mother offered to take the kids for the weekend, I almost agreed. But deep down, the thought caused a slight unease. The idea of being in debt to her seemed uncomfortable to me. The desire to organize a small family holiday herself, to become the initiator of joint time, led to the decision to arrange a surprise for the children. I chose a small place for a mini-golf, imagining how their eyes would shine with surprise. When I told them about our idea of having fun, to my surprise, they immediately thought of the legendary Great Wolf Lodge, the dream park, which we talked about so much, but unfortunately could not go to. It became funny to me, and, deciding to play along, I began to lead them there while they were delighted with the intended purpose of our trip. As we drove, I listened to the children, full of enthusiasm, vividly discussing the upcoming attractions and entertainment, dreaming of every exciting moment in this place far from us. The road dragged on, and I maintained this illusion, seeing their impatient glances, admiration, and a slight thrill of anticipation. When I pulled up to the parking lot, I stopped for a moment, and they immediately thought that we were about to start this journey of their dreams. But a few seconds later, without getting out of the car, I turned around and drove on. The children, at first confused, then disappointed, could not hide their sadness. We arrived at the place for the mini-golf, and although my eldest child got carried away over time, the two youngest ones seemed unable to fully forgive me for this joke. They felt deception, and their mood, as well as the joy of the trip, faded. All evening I tried to justify my action to myself. Was it cruelty? After all, I just wanted to entertain them a little, to see them laugh, but this joke may have been a small blow to their trust. Now that they have been avoiding conversation for several days and their looks are full of reproach, I find myself beginning to doubt the appropriateness of my actions. My mother also did not miss the moment to remind me that it was, in her words, unnecessary cruelty. But it didn't really hurt anyone, I thought. Yes, I saw how children's eyes dimmed with disappointment, but can't every parent afford a light joke if it doesn't hurt? However, Now I'm starting to realize that maybe it was this little deception that changed something in their attitude towards me. It was a hard evening. Explosions of old memories of what had once been resentment and pain filled my thoughts, and now, after talking with my friend, I felt like I was in the middle of a strange ironic theater. She, my friend, who had been by my side during the darkest of times, now seemed not to understand, or did not want to understand, what it was like to go through that unplanned void after the engagement, which became a series of painful nights and long conversations with herself. Her words sounded like cold rain falling directly on open wounds. She didn't just expect me to understand, but demanded it. Oh, how comical it is. Now that everything was turned upside down, she wanted me, like a character in a play, to show generosity and generosity by choosing a gift for someone who had left me on the sidelines just 2 years ago. And for whom? For the happiness of her brother, who deceived me, leaving me wounded and humiliated in front of my whole family, forcing me to justify myself to those who were in anticipation of the celebration that was supposed to be the beginning of my new life. She asked me to forget about it for the sake of one of the scenes that society loves so much, scenes of forgiveness and reconciliation, as if the very idea of this act could wash away all his guilt from her brother and all the pain from me. At that moment, I wanted to scream at the absurdity of this requirement. How could she not understand that in every word she said there was a reminder of how he betrayed me, how he left me among the ruins of our plans, how he turned my life upside down without thinking? And now she was asking me to be generous, as if forgetting all this was an easy act, as if the pain trapped in a corner would suddenly recede at the first command. I stared at her, unable to believe that the person who was with me that night when tears were rolling down my cheeks could now so easily question it. When I received this unexpected message from him, all the old memories surfaced, lined up in front of my eyes, his voice, his touch, all the conversations about the future that never came. And with what ease he now wrote an apology, with what ease he expected forgiveness, as if he knew that all this was in the past. But it was the lightness and carelessness of his words that irritated me. I left his message unanswered, realizing that returning to this conversation would be like opening a scarred wound again. And now, when my friend left me alone at this table, when her anger was reflected in every step away from me, I realized that even this disappointment was only a small response to my decision, a barely noticeable resonance to the sounds of my refusal. The situation with Alex and his mother, it would seem, is simple, but in reality hides a whole layer of misunderstanding and disregard for important boundaries for a teenager. Alex, a boy who just a few years ago could run to his mother for any trifle, now stood on the threshold of a new stage, where the words and gestures of his parents had a different price for him. The time of carefree childhood had passed, and now waves of vague, sometimes frightening changes were covering him. And when his mother entered the bathroom without warning, he felt it as an intrusion, as an unwelcome reminder that his right to personal space remained unrecognized. The broken leg was not just a physical injury, but also a symbol of his vulnerability, which manifested itself at that moment with a vengeance. Teenagers are acutely aware when their sense of their own independence is threatened, especially at times when they are most vulnerable. He felt trapped in his own limitations, physically and emotionally, deprived of the opportunity to escape the presence of his mother and her imposed help. It wasn't a random reaction, rather, it was a desperate demand for respect, given under an open shell of words that, though harsh, protected his last remaining boundaries. She, his mother, may not even have noticed that she had crossed that line. For her, Alex remained a child who needed her help, especially when a broken leg made him helpless in the eyes of a caring parent. She was used to helping, considered it her duty. But it did not occur to her that, in fact, her son was already on the threshold of his own freedom, that help now had a different form and importance for him. And perhaps that's why she didn't realize how important this tiny gesture of respect was to Alex, knocking on the door, asking if he wanted her presence at a time when his own space was limited to a tiny bathroom. And now, when she turned to his father with a demand to punish his son in order to put him back in his place, she seemed to have missed the essence of the problem itself. Punishment for the words he said in a state of stress will not bring him awareness, but, on the contrary, will distance her from him even more, make her close herself, feel her insecurity again in front of those who, it would seem, should have been his shield. She couldn't sleep for a long time that night when her husband locked the bedroom door, leaving her alone with her thoughts. In silence, with the occasional crackle of passing cars, she returned to what had happened over and over again. Her words are careless, harmless at first glance. "It's just a car," turned out to be that ill-considered comment that tore through the thin fabric of their marriage, shattered by time and, as it now seemed to her, accumulated discontent. At the moment she said that, she had no idea how much damage her words were doing. "It's just a car" was a phrase in which she probably didn't put any deep meaning, but which, like a drop, fell into the bowl of his accumulated irritation. In every sound of this simple phrase, the husband heard neglect, inattention, and, perhaps, even indifference to what was important to him, to their safety, stability, and to the very car that now needed repair. What had happened now seemed much more than a simple incident on the road. It was a symbol, a reminder of their shared life, which gradually became more complicated until the simple road turned into a bumpy path covered with unspoken resentments and unhealed wounds. The car, as it seemed to her, an innocent little traffic violation, now became the reason that her husband did not want to talk, did not answer the phone and, as if hiding behind a wall of silence, avoided any communication. With each passing day, his cold behavior increased her guilt, unbearable and heavy. She remembered how they had once discussed everything together, joys and fears, worries and worries. But now something has changed. She felt like a stranger in her own home. Her every word seemed to run into an invisible barrier that she could no longer penetrate. Her husband's estrangement, his silence, his attempts to avoid her became a pain that grew day by day. In an attempt to find an answer, she turned over and over again to the details of the day when the accident occurred. Maybe she shouldn't have been speeding. Maybe she shouldn't have so hastily given up on everything and said that it was just a car. Every thought that came back to that moment, like ripples on water, brought more and more doubts. Her words now sounded in his head not as a soothing statement, but as an indifferent gesture that probably struck him to the heart. It wasn't just a car for him. It was their common work, what he considered the result of their life together and its aspirations, their common path. She remembered how they bought this car, the first major contribution together, the first months of discussions, the choice of a model, budget meetings, and the search for compromises that reflected their common aspirations and dreams. She knew how important this purchase was to him, as a symbol of independence and stability, as a reflection of their common life and mutual care. He was always proud of her, saying that this car was like a part of their family. And now she, her hasty, has destroyed this connection, neglected what was for him a symbol of their common path. The quiet nights in the guest room became unbearable for her. Lying under a thick blanket in the corner that was now her temporary shelter, she listened to the sounds behind the wall, listening to the silence where, as it seemed to her, her husband's every step in the house could be heard. Sometimes it seemed to her that he was about to come in, that he would open the door, that he would say at least something, a simple "good night" or "how was your day?" But days and nights passed, and not a single sign of reconciliation came from her husband. She tried to write him a message, at least a short one, something like, "I'm sorry, let's talk," but every time she stopped in mid-sentence, erased what she had written and put the phone aside. Her hands were shaking, and her heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to drown out her mind. She knew she had to tell him everything, explain her behavior, but every time she dialed the number, she was stopped by the thought, what if it doesn't matter anymore? What if I've already lost the opportunity to fix something? A fine rain was drizzling outside, which seemed to reflect her condition, filling the world around her with gray fog. She stood at the window in the living room, looking at the drops running down the glass, and remembered how they had stood here together on the same rainy days, discussing plans for the future, dreaming of trips that now seemed as far away and unreal as her attempts to reach his heart. His every cold look, every short word, seemed to push her further and further away.